Hi, I'm John DeDakis, and you're one-to-one with me, and I'm one-to-one with thriller novelist James Grady. James is a fascinating guy. His first novel, 6 Days of the Condor, became the classic Robert Redford movie, which was retitled 3 Days of the Condor. It's a movie, they had to make it shorter. And it's also the current Max Irons TV series Condor. He's received numerous awards over his career and has published more than a dozen novels and 3 times that many short stories. In addition, he's been a muckraking journalist and scriptwriter for film and television. London's Daily Telegraph says that James Grady is one of the 50 crime writers to read before you die. And the Washington Post compared his prose to George Orwell and Bob Dylan. And I would add probably Paul Simon as well. Hi, James. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, John. This is a treat for a homebound person like me.
Well, I mean, how have you handled COVID? Are you emerging now from your cocoon?
I think like a lot of people, we are merging, but we're cautious.
Right.
It's funny to travel around. I was just in New York City, where 80% of the city that is now having almost really high rates of infection are walking around in maskless, and in bars maskless, and in restaurants maskless. And that was kind of a shock because I'm in just inside the Beltway, just a stone throw from you, and we're still fairly well, I guess, say, being cautious.
Yeah, I would say that we're going to be with it. It's going to be with us for quite a while with the variants and things like that because it's been so politicized over the
Oh,
last 3 years. And I'd say
oh,
my
well,
argument is, I mean, you've been a journalist. My hunch is that's why they never really were able to tamp it down as effectively as they did polio, for instance.
absolutely. I mean, and polio is a perfect example. The entire nation I rallied behind Dwight Eisenhower, and there was no dissent. There was no. The only thing you would hear was, "What can I do to help?"
Right. Yeah.
And it just, I'm stunned by our current. Um, it's not even anti-vaccination. It seems something more than that.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk about that. I want to first talk about your new book, This Train. I don't know. Do you have a copy of it there that you
I
can
do.
hold up? Let me go solo here so that
There
we
we
can.
go.
Yeah,
Let me see if I can pull some. Yeah, watch this. Nope, did that help?
pull it closer to the camera, maybe. Oh, that's not. Yeah, there you go. This train. And
Okay.
what's the graphic? What's the video or
The
the?
graphic is this amazing footage of a train coming through what looks to be a magical time, like somewhere between darkness and dawn. And, it has a great blurb from Steve Hunter on it, which I don't know. Do you know Steve?
No, I don't.
Oh, the Bob Lee Swagger series. There's been a movie and a TV series. Um, American Sniper, I think, was the
Right, right.
was the I can't what was the I can't remember the name of
Did
the
did
TV series.
did you have anything to do with the cover, or is that
Yes,
something that
this is
the publisher
one
does?
reason I love this publisher is I've been listened to better than really before. And they were open to ideas. They were open to suggestions. They followed up. I mean, I'm just thrilled to be with Pegasus. They got this train on the tracks.
Well, Parade Magazine has This Train as its #1 summer read pick. So tell us what's the basic plot?
Well, I'd almost rather start by telling you how it came
All
about.
right,
And
do
that,
that.
that goes, then I grew up in a small northern Montana town. I used to say it was 60 miles east of the Rockies and 30 miles south of Canada and a million miles from everywhere else in the world, which was sort of true. when I was growing up, but twice a day, the Empire Builder train running from Seattle to Chicago and back again would come through the town and blow that whistle and stop. And it was a clockwork event. And when I realized about 3 years ago that I wanted to write a book with two tracks, actually. One, a huge thriller track, and two, the other one kind of a reporting track about where we are in America now, where we're going. And especially I wanted to show my readers glimpses of the heartland that they otherwise might not would. That I think has been underreported on and kind of maligned for a long time. And I'm a Heartland guy, so I wanted to do these two tracks, and immediately, of course, the Empire Builder whistle blew into my head. It had to be a train thriller, a robbery. And then there were like all these wonderful problems, like what could you put on a passenger train that would be worth stealing? And actually, I fell into some factual luck there, but I don't want to give it away because that's part of the part of the book is what's going on. But also, I think they said that in that review you were quoting from early from Booklist. I discovered I don't like to, and everybody in my fiction should be a leading character. We're all human beings. Just because the person walking past us in the park doesn't happen to notice that, we have our own stories. And I wanted to have a cast in which my characters would personify a lot of the things that I also wanted to talk about in the other part of the train ride. Plus, they also had to be really interesting and a little quirky, shall we say?
Oh, yes, there's definitely that. But here's the thing that really surprised me. And maybe this will help when someone picks it up, because it doesn't read the way I expected a thriller would read. You have a different approach to writing, and it's almost, I would argue, poetic.
Oh,
Can you describe the mentality and what you're trying to do in the way you tell the story?
well, I feel like I've been a student of writing my entire life, and everything I write becomes to me a learning experience. And I started letting some influences, some other, classic works of fiction and poetry. I got what they were doing. I finally realized that there were ways to just make a simple declarative sentence come off the page as well as taking you along the page. So actually, there's a martial arts move called Fa Jing, and you pop something up off the ground, and it just I love a sentence. You're reading Jess Walters, who I really recommend, or a bunch of the other great authors we got out there now, and suddenly you're doing, it's an exciting plot, sure, but there's something else more going on for you. And I think that my writing style has changed over the last, I think over the last two books.
Would you say you're taking more risks as a writer?
You could talk about that. Yes, in a way, it is riskier, but it's also more rewarding as a writer, because I can tell you a story, the Dashiell Hammett quote that all you need for a good story is a girl and a gun. And you give me a girl and a gun, yeah, I can give you you tell me how many words you want. I can produce a thriller, but I don't want to approach my fiction like that. I don't. I almost always start with this. Yes, it's inspiration sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's just where you pick up a newspaper. For example, I did this with a book called Steel Town that I lost the battle. The publishers insisted that the title be spelled Steel Town. I wanted Steal Town because that's what it was. It was Youngstown, Ohio. And the whole book was triggered by a 2-sentence story in the Washington Post about the testimony of a citizens group from Youngstown, Ohio, that claimed that with the crash of the steel industry, the only powers left in Youngstown, Ohio, were competing groups of organized crime and corrupt politicians. I mean, my jaw literally dropped, and within weeks I was out there, and it was absolutely true. I think it's better now, but when I went the year before, they had 58 car bombings.
Oh my God.
That's, and
oh my goodness. Well, let's go back to those early days. I mean, you were an investigative reporter for syndicated columnist Jack Anderson way back in this would have been what, the 60s? Tell us how you got. How did you get
there? I got there much later. I got there when I was 20. I don't know. Yes, I was about to turn 25, and it was the year after Watergate.
Right, and you had already written Condor.
Yeah, Condor was out. In fact, I had just finished a Senate fellowship, and I've got Condor coming out. I've got a contract to do a quickie sequel, which I accepted, and maybe I shouldn't have. And then I wrote a comic novel like Donald Westlake. I thought it was wonderful. They did too. They said, but we'll never publish it under your name because it'll hurt your franchise with Condor. And I'm thinking, I want to write, every kind of novel.
Right.
But at the time I didn't know the level of my power, and I knew that everybody was just waiting for me to fail anyway. He's this young kid from Montana. What does he know? So I let them put it out under, in this country, a pseudonym. Let's
go back to Condor.
Okay.
I mean, you were basically a kid and you wrote that novel, and I mean, was it a fluke? I mean, how do you explain what happened?
I think fluke is probably the best word you could have used.
And why? Why was it a fluke? How did it happen?
W.W. Norton stayed and usually in those days incredibly conservative publishing house, came up with the idea to hire William Morris, which was in 1973. It was the agency. I mean, it was big. It was Hollywood and books. And Norton's plan was to hire them. Norton would pick 3 novels from what they used to call the slush pile, which is you mail it in, and you hope. And Norton picked 3 of those, hired William Morris to represent him to the movies. I think they paid all of us the same thing, $1,000, which I thought was a lot. I didn't, I was living in a reconverted garage in Missoula, Montana, so $1,000 was huge. But they got these 3 books to William Morris. I think William Morris was able to sell one of the others also. but they brought mine to Dino De Laurentiis, and Dino told me, he said, within 4 pages, I knew this was going to be a movie. And this was, a guy who he could read English, but he was Italian. So it was, and it all had, I think that we were coming out of the Vietnam War, and the beginnings of the major revelations of CIA and other stuff. We were you could see how Watergate was going to be big, because it was after 72, you knew Congress was going to do something. And this sort of touched on that and was in DC. And I think all those things, plus, and I am not kidding about this, and it's a little embarrassing, I think that the operative or an operative sense within the New York publishing world was, this kid can write a declarative sentence and a paragraph and, follow through for many pages. And he's from nowhere, Montana. So therefore, to overcome that nowhere, Montana, whatever, he must be a possible genius. So, it just, I think if I'd have submitted 6 Days of the Condor from, say, Albany or New Jersey, I'd still be working, for the road crew in those places. It just.
Where did you get the idea?
Oh, that was so in 1970, Sears and Roebuck, why, I don't know, decided they were going to create a fellowship for college undergraduate journalism students to come to Washington, D.C., to work on congressmen and senators' staffs in the daytime, and to go to classes being taught by what were called investigative reporters. Why a major corporation would yes, I can give you a spin, but nah. And the second year of the program, they brought me back, and I lived on Capitol Hill on A Street Southeast at 6 and A. And my job was about 8 blocks away. And I would walk along A Street every morning. And I would always, at the corner of 4th and A, I would pass this beautiful, large townhouse with a brass plaque by its door. And I never saw anybody go in or come out. And this is after about 2 or 3 months. And it is, and was then, the American Historical Association's national headquarters. But I didn't know. And I kept walking past it, and I went, what if it was a CIA front? And then very shortly after that, because I'm a paranoid, I thought, what if I come back from getting lunch for everybody and all my coworkers have been murdered? Mm-hmm. What am I going to do? And those two ideas only converged in an espionage thriller plot. And it took me, because I had to finish college. I then did a very important political job helping write the Montana's state constitution. And they needed somebody who could write fast. I was not at all qualified in any other way. And then after that, I was able to finally find a job that didn't make me completely, exhausted at the end of the day or early in the morning. Work on this book. This was in starting summer of 72.
Was the goal in your life to be a journalist, a novelist, or were you still just figuring it out?
Oh, I wanted to be a novelist. I just, I told my sister and my cousin when I was like 6 or 7 that, you know, I was hoping I'd get the Nobel Prize for Literature. I couldn't even really, all I knew, it was a big deal, and it was writing about books, and all I wanted to do was write books. I was never going to get to be a rock and roll star. I mean, it was very clear. And somehow I didn't see Hollywood, you know, wanting to let me direct and screenwrite and, you know, star in a motion picture, unless it was about a, you know, a monster in a complete rubber suit. I could have been the Thing. But I was making stories when I was in kindergarten. My mother told me that I would sit her down when I was in about first grade, and I would dictate to her, and she would write the story on whatever kind of pad or things it was in those days, and then I would come down the next day and say okay, and she would only write down the last part so she could, in case I, you know, asked about it. So she just threw it all away. Mom, I'm like in my 20s and a published audience. What was it about? Could it have been about a bear? I don't, you know, it's like, I don't know. So I've always wanted to be a novelist. The journalism was kind of an outgrowth of watching the political and social good pioneered, I would argue, by Cy Hirsch. And, well, you know, sure, before that, the very famous muckraking Lincoln Steffens, guys like that. Mm-hmm. But that was something that would allow me to do what I would call my morality strain and mm-hmm. pay my dues, mm-hmm. And do some good. And when it was funny because I got another fellowship 2 weeks because I was starving in Montana. I applied for whatever. Like 2 weeks after I sold Condor to the movies, I got a Senate fellowship with my senator. So that got me, which was so good on many reasons because it gave me structure. Right. And it got me back east, and it I think helped me from like sort of just wandering off. And then it ends, and about 3 weeks later, I'm sitting there going, oh shit, what am I going to do? You know, am I going to live here? And the phone rings, and it's one of my buddies who went to journalism school with me in Montana, who was working for Jack Anderson. And he said, Jim, everybody else is somewhere else in the world on assignment. The only persons here are like college interns who don't know what to do after they answer the phone. Hello, could you come in and just help out till the guys come back? And I thought it'd be a great couple, 3 months. And a little over 4 years later, I realized I was doing a lot of good, hard work for Jack, not so much for me. And it was hard to give up, but I did.
I want to talk about Jack Anderson and journalism. I want to talk about the process of writing, but let's talk a little bit about the making of the movie 3 Days of the Condor, because sure. You were on the set, at least for a little bit of that, talking with Robert Redford. So take us there. What was that like?
It was, you know, you go through the police barricades, and you turn and look at a brass plaque on a New York townhouse that is about an organization you made up. And, you know, you go in, and there's, you know, cameras, lights, an entire crew. There's a coffee table or a crafts table. There's, you know, all these various settings for various scenes. You know, it was you quickly learn how incredibly hard it is to make a good movie, how hard everybody works, and how literally every second counts, and both in money and artistic effect. So that was, and you know, should I tell my Robert Redford story?
Yes, I was going to ask you to tell that.
Okay. So I'd gone up against the wall. Finally, I go up and, you know, Mr. Redford, I'm James Grady, I wrote this. James, how are you? Look, he says, look, and he turns and he looks to the assistant director. Do we have a few minutes for James and I to talk? And this is Robert Redford, and they would have probably said, sure, 2 hours, 3 hours, what do you want? He leads me out onto that concrete stoop. And we're just talking, and he's being nice, and he's smart, and he's funny, and he's paying attention. There's no I am a star thing going on. And then, and I can still remember it was off to my right, blowing right through, this time the police man barricades, come two women. I don't know if it's Upper East Side or Upper West Side. It's diamonds and furs and fancy hairdos and I think hats. They're in their like late 40s, maybe early 50s at most. And they walk past and dripping in mink, and they look up and they see Robert Redford. They grab a hold of each other, and they used to call this in politics the double jump, and they double jumped together all the way down the sidewalk past that. I'm just flabbergasted. I mean, that usually doesn't happen to me, but no, I wish I would have.
Usually doesn't.
Yeah. I wish I had the presence to have thought of that joke then, but I figure I got to say something about this event, and I look at Redford and I say, "Does that happen to you all the time?" He says, "Oh yeah." And I said, "Well, what do you do about it?" And he says, "I just keep talking to you." I mean, I'd have followed that man anywhere at that point. He just was a gracious, wonderful man, terrific actor. And he's done more by creating the Sundance Film Festival for American and international cinema than anybody in our lifetime.
Did it bother you at all that the movie changed the book a bit?
No, not at all. I mean, there were a lot of reasons they had to. They had to move it to New York because Redford didn't want to move to Washington for a year and a half with his school-age children because he was going to do All the President's Men. And you look at the plots of those two movies, one of them can be moved out of Washington, D.C. That was mine.
Right.
And the other thing was, they wrote the script as fast and true, as good as they could, and then counted the number of days they had, and it was 3. And it was I thought it was perfect. Again, because you do more and less on screen than you do on the page.
Right. Well, now you've done some screenwriting, so how hard is it to make that transition when you've been, writing for the page?
There's a transition that can be difficult. I had to learn a different way of thinking about my prose. I instead of creating just a story, I had to create a story plus a blueprint. It's like you have to imagine. You can't have Paul doing all these extraordinary things because every stunt is a huge amount of money and a chance to go wrong. You could say he did anything on the page and get away with it. You can't get away as much with what you can do in the movies. Even now with CGI, it's still a more constrained media than prose.
Well, and you also have to think visually, entirely visually.
Yes. And you, at the same time that you're doing the visual, you have to have a sense of what's going on inside the character, as well as,
And how do you communicate that on the page of the script? Are you basically telling
really
them?
hard. It's really hard.
Because actors don't like you to give them all kinds of directions.
No, and directors don't like you to do that. One of my mentors in Hollywood was a very successful producer who said, mostly all I want to see is white page. Okay, for like, oh yeah, no, for the whole thing. it's like what the sets are going to be. You don't need to say that Maggie is tearful, because we're supposed to know that from when we saw her. Remember, kid, saw her seen before. So it's a whole different kind of writing. I actually prose. I prefer prose.
Is there a chance that this train is going to be made into a movie? What's happening there? It's very visual on the page. You can't talk about it, right?
Let's say that's a wonderful question that I'm not quite prepared to answer.
You're being coy.
Yeah.
Let me ask it this way: Is there a hope? Is there a hope?
Yes, there is a hope.
Okay.
And
is it a realistic hope?
Yes.
Okay.
And the thing is, it could be either a movie or a limited series. So and that's the thing anymore. I've talked to other authors, and you don't. Yes, you want it to go on film, but should you be thinking in those two different mindsets? Because used to be novels and movies were almost on the same track, but streaming limited series, they're over here.
Right.
Oh well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more marketplace for us.
If it ever became a movie, would you have any say or hands-on in terms of the script?
I doubt it. One of the things, I don't want to say most, but many really good directors want, is they want to put their vision into screenwriters' hands who don't have a vision of it yet, and then use those screenwriters to create the blueprint that fits both the story and the ideas, but also with the director's loves and wants and needs and visions.
Let's turn a corner here and go back to the days with Jack Anderson. How has journalism changed from the days when you were working as an investigative reporter for him?
I think, besides the obvious fact that we now have cyber journalism, which is so often not journalism,
right?
I'm sort of appalled at the rise of first person journalism.
What do you mean?
Well, the front page story, or always in magazines, about suddenly the reporter's a character,
right?
And then often they even go into as I stared down into the burning pit of Afghan burned civilians, I wondered, what my mother cooked for me that fateful barbecue night back in Arkansas. I mean, that kind of long digression I find in news stories now. I was trained, let's get the stories, let's get the facts, let's get the 5 W's and an H, and tell it straight and true and clean. And you're not a hero in this story.
Okay, but just for devil's advocate, I mean, Jack Anderson had a point of view. So in a sense, weren't
Absolutely.
you in a sense serving a certain political agenda in your reporting?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much. There were a couple times Jack went off on political things that his staff disagreed with. He tried to stay out of it, but he was a devout Mormon, and he was easily swayed, which is strange. But we didn't make any bones that our stories were laced with an opinion, and the opinion was usually, this guy's bad.
Right.
Here's why. Here's how we know. What are you going to do? And it was for us, it was all about getting to the truth. And we were always, it's funny, all of us in our own minds tried to stay away from partisan politics in our stories. It was, in our sources were from both sides of the aisle. And in my case, often from crazy land. But you know, it was hard to be a muckraker for Jack, but it was better being a muckraker for Jack than any kind of other reporting I could imagine I could get a job doing. You know,
Okay, a muckraking is almost an archaic term now. How do you define it, and does it still exist?
I think it does. I mean, there are a couple. David Korn, I think, is a good one. I think another one is a guy named Jeff Stein, who has an intelligence newsletter. I don't know what to call a lot of the media now, but it's muckraking at its heart is about scraping away whatever muck, i.e., public relations, phony credentials, you know, money, scraping all that away to get at what seems to be a provable truth. And it's got to have all those three things. It's got to have a provable truth. I mean, I once had a reporter tell me that, you know, well, if you know it's true, don't you think you should just be able to print that? And I almost punched him, you know?
How would you compare what Tucker Carlson does with muckraking the way you experienced it?
I don't know. Tucker Carlson's not a reporter. He's not a muckraker. He's a shtick artist. You know,
What do you mean?
He's got it's an old vaudeville term, right? I think you got a shtick, you know, and he's managed to parlay hatred and fear and white supremacy and not just ignorance. Ignorance is almost forgivable, but outright lies and misinformation into this. You know, it's all an homage about Tucker, and I don't think he cares about the effect. I was always terrified about the effect of my journalism.
Because why?
What if I hurt somebody accidentally, or what if the guy was innocent? I don't think I think that would be like me speaking Martian to Tucker Carlson. Anyway,
Well, so are you in any way optimistic that, I mean, are we heading in the wrong direction, or is there a strong antithesis to what he's doing?
I think shows like this are an antithesis to the bad media that we're seeing out there. I'm hoping, I want to say for the younger generation, but by that I mean really the ones who are like now 17 to maybe 19 years and younger, who and the millennials also are doing good. I mean, they grew up with Columbine and 9/11 as and now they're you know, but to watch the lessons of history and the ordinary humanity that this country prided itself on, not always honestly, but to watch that be drowned in whirlpools of hate and wild conspiracy accusations. I mean, it's people reading stuff that is incredibly false. I mean, Pizzagate.
Right.
What?
Exactly.
You know, why?
Yeah.
There physically, there is no basement.
Yeah. What you're talking about is the Comet Ping Pong restaurant
Right.
on what is it, Connecticut Avenue?
Yeah, it's
Politics and Prose.
Right.
And the allegation was that Democrats, I think it was Podesta and Hillary, had some sort of a child pedophile ring going on in the basement of this restaurant, and a person showed up with an AR-15, you know, to try to set these kids free. And it could have been a terrible disaster. But it was based on totally false, made up information.
Yep. And And the thing is, that kind of lie lingers. You know, if you believed in it once, you're more likely to believe in something like it again. And if you know, and guys like Tucker Carlson didn't come out and do a whole big show and say, you know, this was a stupid idea, this was a horrible, this is lies. No, they would throw more muck at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk. There are probably plenty of people, I mean, in my experience, who aspire to be novelists, thriller writers, memoirists, or whatever, and they want to break into the business. What are some? I attended a class that, or I guess it was a panel discussion that you were on, a panel of one at the C3 Con that Austin Camacho hosts. It's Creatures, Crimes, and Creativity in Columbia, Maryland. Great writers conference, and you held forth. And one of the quotes was, you know, we were told, write what you know. And you said, no, write what you don't know, which again is the antithesis, or it's the counterintuitive approach to writing. What did you mean by that?
Well, I want to go out and find something out that's interesting. I have this, let's say I have this brilliant idea. I want to go out and find it in reality and I want to smell it. You know, I want to walk in it. I want to hear the traffic that's going by. And I want to know as much about it as I can, so that then the imagination of it is true. It may not be real, but it's true. And there's a big distinction there.
What's the distinction?
Real is a three-dimensional concept. And I think true is a four-dimensional concept. And that fourth dimension is sort of how something fits in the universe, how everything has its own individual identity. And I think you have to try and let that come out. And so that means, you know, you're writing a story about riding the Amtrak from Seattle to Chicago. You have to listen to the people in the passengers' cars. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I have in this train is reportage. You know, I was there. I mean, there's a sort of a rebellious scene set in Havre, Montana. That was me.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, can you, without giving away plot,
I'm riding the train on my research trip. And as I pull into Havre, Montana, which is exactly 103 miles east of my hometown, it's maybe 10,000 people. The train stops, and there are probably 40 to 50 black uniformed, ballistic vest, ICE, with most of them saying federal police. There were a few that said ICE. AK-15 guys on the platform, and and then only two or three got on the train, and I think they came through looking for people. And I thought, where are we? You know, this is crazy. I mean, for one thing, the major groups to be afraid of in that country are right-wing militias, and they are heavily armed. You are setting, you know, a gunfight up to happen. So how many illegal people are smuggling coming down from Canada? it's really, if you get to Canada, why are you going to come to the US? You know,
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
they're better.
Well, so when you saw all these guys, did you immediately put your reporter's cap on and start finding out why the hell are you guys here?
Nah, I got my, what I did is I walked outside and there was this landing, and I looked at the train attendant, my train, and says, I'm just going to take a little stretch. And I stood in this platform as close as to the armed guards as I could get. And I did Tai Chi. However, Tai Chi, one of its three rivers is martial. And I made sure that I made it absolutely clear that I am a clear and present danger. If you want, you know, it was my rebellion. It was my rebellion. I have my right to show this and do this. And besides, it was crazy. you know, and it was, they would look at me and a couple would go, who's that old guy? But you know, I was an old guy, you know, so but it was, I really felt like I had to do something that showed the freedom of the individual in the face of those black jumpsuits.
So is one of the characters in this train based on you in any way, any autobiographical
Well,
aspect?
yeah, there could be one character in there that has certain elements of me in there. Yeah, that's probably fair to say.
Can we name that person? Would it have been Ross or?
Well, Ross had some of it, but
I suppose all of them have something of you in there,
yeah,
right?
I just forgot my guy's name.
Let's see. There's Brian. There's Garrett. Is it Garrett?
Just a second. Here we go. Graham.
What is it?
Graham.
Oh,
Graham.
Graham. Exactly. Right. Okay.
Graham is.
I know. It's like you write so many books, and it's like, who are these people again?
It's also, you know, it's funny because I've got a huge number of as Booklist said, everybody's a lead character, and there's essentially 15 of them, and I got to know them all pretty well. And it was, you know, I'd be telling a story about, you know, Ulysses at the dinner table, and Bonnie would look at me and say, "Wait a minute, is this your old professor?"
Right.
And what? No, he's in. And she said, "You're not working now," you know. Long-suffering spouses.
Exactly. Are any of the characters in your book actual people that you observed on your research trip?
There were composites, yes.
Okay.
But they were not usually in the characters who weren't in the Big 15.
Mm-hmm. Had you written any of it before you did your research trip so that you had enough?
And that was a real conscious decision.
Mm-hmm. Because why? Because
I didn't want to take the trip with any more preconceived notions than I already had. And I had essentially the cast kind of in my head. And I wanted to ride the train with them. And they kept surprising me. No, I'm not like that. You know, it's like, okay, you know, and then getting off the train. I go right up to where the last scene is. I literally walk that journey and stop the book at that moment. My sister and brother-in-law helped me find the right place before I got there.
Uh-huh.
And it just, I wanted that one trip that was really two. Everything seems like to be in this book is like there's the above and the under. And there's the side by side, the two rails. You know?
Right. Are you a planner, a seat of the pantser, on a sort of a
well, for a book like this, I had to plan a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an intricate thriller heist. You know, you got, if you don't put something to steal on the train, you don't really, well, you could make that a comic, but I think Donald Westlake did that years ago, actually. So I plan as much as I feel I have to. And then as I go into the book, the characters change it, and so I have to go back and okay, I have to move this around. But it's as much as possible an organic experience. Holy shit, did I just have a character do that? He just shot him, and it made sense. And when that happens as a writer,
Yeah.
you go with that, because that instinctive, creative, undefinable moment is the reflection of whatever thing you might dare call talent.
How many drafts would you say this train went through?
That's a fascinating question for several reasons. One, computers have changed the concept of drafts. When I first started on a standard typewriter, you didn't, your rough drafts looked like they'd been hit with a grenade, and that because you couldn't keep typing over the same sentence.
Right.
But I usually do say 9 to 21 polishes of any final manuscript. That's after having gone through it, and polished every chapter. And that you find something almost every time.
Right.
And you think to yourself, this is perfect. I don't need to do anything else more, and I'll come back on Wednesday. I'll skim over it, and holy shit, come Wednesday, you're looking at a giant hole the size of the Grand Canyon that somebody's got to fill, and it better be you.
Do you ever have writer's block? Does it ever just not happen?
I get stumped sometimes. That's different than a block. A true writer's block, I don't think so. I've ever really experienced it. I mean,
a writer's block, the way I understand it, is fear-based. It's like, I'm afraid I'm going to get this wrong, and you freeze.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a poet named Richard Hugo who I studied with. He was the one who came up with the phrase you might recognize, "the last good kiss," that James Crumley used for his most famous book. Hugo said that if you're having writer's block, look at the wall. What color is the wall? Go out, and the first car you see with that color, look at the license plate. The first two numbers on the license plate are the number of lines you got to write. The second two numbers are the number of syllables per line. Now go write your damn poem. And inevitably, the absurdity and the difficulty of that assignment tends to unblock anybody who's not. Some of my colleagues have had like trauma that can surface in their writing. Literally, they realize, oh shit, that thing that happened to me, and that can paralyze them for a long time, and they have to be able to address the trauma before they can go back to writing. And you can only just hope that never happens to you.
Yeah. A couple of people have asked questions in the
I'm
chat. Diane asks, who are some of the authors that you like to read?
Oh man, Diane, that's like a loaded question.
Right. I hate that question.
Jeff Walters is, if you haven't ever read him, get off now. Any one of his books, except I would argue maybe the last one, you don't want to start with it. Go with his beginning.
And who's that again?
His name, Jess Walters. He's just a brilliant writer out of Spokane. Jeff Deaver always delivers. There's, I'm on a kick now where I'm reading a lot of poetry. Jim Harrison wrote Legends of the Fall, and Leonard Cohen, as well as I'm reading Chekhov for the first time. But I read all the great thriller writers. Donald Westlake. He today is still better than most people. I learned to write by reading the same Alistair MacLean novel over and over, like something like 18 times while working on a road crew. And then I learned all his technique, and then I learned there was a such thing as technique. I'm sorry. I feel, Diane, like I hijacked your question, and I apologize.
I think you actually spoke to it. There's another question here from Chuck Roberts, who asks, was Sidney Pollack a good collaborator?
Oh, she was. I watched him collaborate with Redford and you know, various creative individuals on the set, and he would always be listening to the crew's suggestions. There was not a bit of arrogance. He was completely, the key grips could approach him and chat with him, which let me tell you, that is not always the case on a movie set. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Sidney was a great guy, and I use that term specifically. He was the guy you wanted to have a cup of coffee with, maybe a beer.
In the few minutes that we've got left, I wonder if you wouldn't mind reading a short excerpt from this train, because the writing is so distinctive that I think it would be wise to give people a sense of what they're getting into, because it's so different from what I expected when I first started reading it. And it took me a while to realize this is poetry. And again, I'm not sure if poetry is what you were going for.
I think that is one of the nicest things I've ever been asked or told in an interview. If you even want to read, this is on page 10 of the novel. We've already met 14 of the characters and learned something about them. Learned that there's a smuggler, learned that there's some sort of high-tech crime going on, learned that there's a potential murder going on, and that there's a secret in a teenage girl's purse. And they're all waiting in the premium cabin section. And this is what I'm going to start with on page 10. Then came Ross. Last came Ross. Ross bummed a lift to the train station from upstairs Amanda, who believed she could always beat the clock. Upstairs Amanda owned the Seattle townhouse, where Ross rented the basement apartment. Bonus cash for her because the marijuana dispensary she managed paid just fine, thank you very much, everybody who'd gotten the commerce and cool of cannabis out of the local crime books. Upstairs, Amanda's tattoo-sleeved arms wrestled her car as they careened to the train station through the city with a science fiction skyline of construction cranes and looming skyscrapers for cyber tech corporate giants. They drove under a bridge, past tents of tattered cloth and plastic sheeting pressed up against the concrete. Could be a woman, could be a man, pushed an overflowing shopping cart. A rag-swaddled sister and brother duo huddled against the Apple Store's brick wall. Out there in the rain, a thin man standing on the center line of this major road held a hand-lettered sign, help. As Ross's ride whooshed him to where he had to go, he felt a familiar firm flatness tucked against his spine and wondered again if he should use a holster. Upstairs, Amanda slammed on the brakes. Her tires slid, stopped on the wet street in front of the train station with what she called plenty of time to spare. Ross bent down to lift his computer bag off the car floor by his feet. When he turned to say thanks, she said, "Open your mouth." He did. She popped in a lemon drop. Is that 100% is the officially cool said back then. She tucked a cellophane envelope in his maroon shirt's pocket. Later days, she said. Maybe this will help you pull your triggers. Reflexes brushed Ross's hand over the black leather jacket above his spine. And remember, said Amanda, you wanted this gig. No, said Ross. I needed this gig.
And hold the cover up again there, sir.
Oh, you bet.
We're trying to sell books here.
Oh, there we go.
Hold on. Let me just go to the solo. There you go. This train James Grady is the author. You probably know him best from 6 Days of the Condor, but if all goes well, you may be seeing more of his work on television if this is ever made into a movie. Uh, this has been fun, James.
It's been great for me too. Thank you for doing this so much.
This has been great, and good luck with the book. And I hope I'll be able to see you on the circuit as we both talk to other writers about our work.
Me too. And again, thanks so much, John, for doing this.
Great. Okay. Take care.
Bye.